History loves to celebrate the great journeys that changed the world. Columbus crossing the Atlantic, Marco Polo reaching China, Lewis and Clark mapping the American West. But what if I told you that the most legendary journey of all time wasn't about discovering new lands? It was about a single man carrying so much wealth that he accidentally crashed entire economies just by passing through? This is the story of Mansa Musa, the ruler of Mali, who embarked on a pilgrimage so extravagant that it redrew the economic map of 3 continents. Picture this: a man so wealthy that when European cartographers drew their maps, they placed his image holding a golden orb, marking him as the richest person who ever lived. But here's the twist: this incredible display of wealth nearly destroyed his own empire and fundamentally altered the balance of power across medieval Africa and the Middle East. How does a king from the heart of West Africa become so wealthy that his generosity creates economic chaos from Cairo to Constantinople? What drives a man with unlimited power to abandon his throne and walk 3,000 miles across some of the world's most dangerous terrain? And why does this journey, completed nearly 700 years ago, still echo through financial markets and international relations today? The year is 1324. Europe is emerging from the Dark Ages, still centuries away from its age of exploration. The Islamic world stretches from Spain to Indonesia, connected by trade routes that carry not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and faiths. And in the heart of West Africa lies an empire that European maps can barely comprehend. Mali, a kingdom built on gold mines so productive that they supply most of the precious metal flowing through medieval trade networks. But this isn't just a story about gold. It's about the collision of faith and power, about what happens when unlimited wealth meets unshakable belief. Because in 1324, Mansa Musa made a decision that would transform him from a regional African king into a global legend. He would undertake the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca that every devout Muslim must complete at least once in their lifetime. And he would do it in a way that no one before or since has ever attempted. What happened next would make Mansa Musa's name echo through palaces from London to Baghdad, crash gold prices for a decade, and establish Mali as one of the world's most powerful empires. This is the story of the wealthiest journey the world has ever seen. Long before Mansa Musa's golden caravan would dazzle the courts of Cairo, the man who would become history's wealthiest ruler began his reign in the sprawling kingdom of Mali around 1312. Picture the West African landscape, not the desert that many imagine, but a rich tapestry of grasslands, forests, and river valleys where the mighty Niger River creates one of Africa's most fertile regions. Musa inherited more than just a throne. He inherited the legacy of Sundiata Keita, Mali's founding emperor, and a kingdom that controlled something more valuable than armies or cities: the gold mines of Bambouk and Bure. These weren't small-scale mining operations, they were industrial powerhouses that had been feeding Europe's hunger for gold for generations. Every nugget pulled from Mali's earth would eventually find its way to European coins, Islamic dinars, and the treasuries of kingdoms from Morocco to Egypt. But Musa's brilliance wasn't just sitting on gold mines. He understood something that would make him legendary: the power of trade networks. Mali sat at the crossroads of the trans-Saharan trade routes, where caravans carrying salt from the northern desert met merchants bringing gold, ivory, and slaves from the south. Musa turned this geographic advantage into systematic wealth creation. He established security along trade routes, standardized weights and measures, and created a currency system that merchants trusted from Timbuktu to Tunis. His first major test came early in his reign when rival kingdoms challenged Mali's dominance over the gold trade. Rather than simply deploying his armies, though Mali's military was formidable, Musa demonstrated strategic brilliance that would define his entire approach to power. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he made them wealthy partners. He offered trade agreements so favorable that resistance became economically irrational. Former enemies became allies not through conquest, but through profit sharing. This approach transformed Mali from a regional power into an empire. Under Musa's rule, the kingdom expanded to encompass nearly 500,000 square miles, larger than medieval Europe, stretching from the Atlantic coast to the bend of the Niger River. But size wasn't Musa's greatest achievement. It was the unprecedented prosperity he created. His kingdom's annual gold production reached levels that European chroniclers could barely believe, generating wealth on a scale that wouldn't be seen again until the Industrial Revolution. Yet with this incredible success came a deeper calling. Musa wasn't just a king. He was a devout Muslim ruling in an age when faith and politics were inseparable. The Quran commanded every able-bodied Muslim to complete the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, and Musa felt this obligation intensely. But he faced a dilemma that no other ruler in history had encountered. How do you leave an empire when your personal presence is essential to its stability? How do you travel 3,000 miles through foreign territories when every neighboring kingdom knows exactly how wealthy you are? The answer reveals Musa's genius. He wouldn't try to hide his wealth or travel secretly. Instead, he would turn his pilgrimage into the greatest display of power and faith the medieval world had ever witnessed. He would bring so much gold, so many attendants, such magnificent displays of wealth that no one would dare threaten his caravan. His pilgrimage wouldn't be an abandonment of his royal duties. It would be their ultimate expression. In 1324, after 12 years of accumulating wealth and planning, Mansa Musa made his decision. He would undertake the Hajj, but he would do it in a way that would announce Mali's power to every kingdom between West Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. He began assembling what historians would later call the most magnificent traveling court in human history. The caravan that departed Mali's capital in 1324 defied every conception of medieval travel. Imagine a procession stretching for miles across the African landscape. 60,000 people, including soldiers, merchants, doctors, teachers, and holy men. But these weren't the numbers that would make history. It was what they carried. 500 slaves, each bearing a golden staff weighing 4 pounds. 100 camels, each loaded with 300 pounds of gold dust. Personal attendants carrying golden umbrellas, golden chairs, and golden vessels for every meal. And at the center of this impossible caravan rode Mansa Musa himself, not as a distant emperor in a covered litter, but openly displaying his wealth with calculated precision. European chroniclers, writing decades later from second-hand accounts, struggled to convey the sheer scale of what witnesses described. Arab historians, more familiar with wealth and power, were equally amazed. Al-Umari, writing in Damascus, recorded that people in Cairo were still talking about Musa's visit 12 years after it happened. But Musa's genius wasn't in the display itself. It was in understanding exactly what that display would accomplish. Every kingdom along his route faced the same calculation. This caravan carried more mobile wealth than most treasuries held permanently. Attacking it would mean enormous riches, but success would require defeating an army of 60,000 people who had already traveled thousands of miles through hostile territory. The risk-reward mathematics made negotiation far more attractive than conflict. The first major test came at the Kingdom of Kanem, east of Lake Chad. The ruler, Sultan Dunama Tseri, commanded one of the most powerful armies in Central Africa and controlled crucial trade routes that Musa needed to traverse. Rather than pay tribute or seek permission to pass, Musa offered something unprecedented: a partnership. He would share detailed information about European demand for African goods, provide direct access to Mali's gold markets, and guarantee safe passage for Kanem's merchants through West African territories. The negotiation that followed became a template for diplomatic revolution. Instead of the traditional medieval approach, tribute, dominance, or war, Musa created what modern economists would recognize as mutually beneficial trade agreements. Canaan got access to Mali's wealth and trade networks. Mali got safe passage and intelligence about Eastern markets. Both kingdoms became more prosperous, and Musa's caravan continued eastward with local guides and additional protection. This pattern repeated across the journey. In each major kingdom, Musa arrived not as a conqueror or supplicant, but as a partner offering genuine economic benefits. His wealth became a diplomatic tool more powerful than any army. Local rulers, who might have seen his caravan as a threat, instead saw it as an opportunity to connect their territories to the broader Islamic economic world. The real transformation began when Musa's caravan reached Cairo in July 1324. The Mamluk Sultanate controlled Egypt, the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and the crucial trade routes connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad had seen wealthy pilgrims before, but nothing had prepared him for Mansa Musa's arrival. What happened next became legendary throughout the Islamic world. Musa didn't simply pay for his entourage's expenses in Cairo. He began distributing gold with such generosity that he fundamentally altered the city's economy. He gave golden gifts to everyone he met, from government officials to random merchants in the bazaars. He purchased supplies for his entire caravan without negotiating prices, paying whatever sellers asked in pure gold. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. Gold prices in Cairo, which had been stable for decades, began plummeting as Musa flooded the market with precious metal. Merchants who accepted his gold found themselves possessing so much that it lost scarcity value. The Egyptian dinar, backed by gold reserves, began fluctuating wildly as money changers struggled to process the sudden abundance. But Musa's generosity served a calculated purpose beyond religious obligation or diplomatic courtesy. He was demonstrating Mali's wealth so thoroughly that every merchant, diplomat, and traveler passing through Cairo would carry stories of his kingdom's prosperity back to their home countries. He was essentially conducting a medieval marketing campaign, using gold as advertising to establish Mali's reputation across 3 continents. The strategy worked beyond his wildest expectations. Within months, stories of Mansa Musa's wealth reached European courts, Middle Eastern palaces, and trading centers across North Africa. The famous Catalan Atlas of 1375, drawn by European cartographers 50 years later, depicts Musa sitting on his throne in West Africa, holding a golden orb, with text describing him as the richest king in the land. After completing his religious obligations in Mecca and Medina, Musa began the return journey to Mali, but the economic disruption he had created followed him. Gold prices remained depressed for over a decade, affecting trade relationships across the Islamic world. Some merchants made fortunes by purchasing gold cheaply in Cairo and selling it at higher prices in regions Musa hadn't visited. Others found their traditional business models destroyed by the sudden abundance of precious metal. More significantly, Musa's display had achieved its diplomatic objectives. Mali was no longer seen as a regional African kingdom, but as a major power worthy of international respect. Trade delegations began arriving in Timbuktu from Europe and the Middle East. Scholars and architects came seeking patronage. Mali had announced itself to the world, and the world was paying attention. But unprecedented wealth and international fame came with consequences that even Mansa Musa couldn't anticipate. The very success of his pilgrimage began creating pressures that would test both his kingdom and his character in ways he never expected. The first challenge emerged from his own generosity. The gold market disruption he had created in Cairo spread throughout the Islamic trading network, affecting currencies and trade relationships across North Africa and the Middle East. Merchants who had built their businesses on stable gold prices found themselves facing economic chaos. Some blamed Mali directly for the financial instability, creating the first stirrings of resentment against Musa's kingdom. More problematically, Musa's display had revealed the exact source and scale of Mali's wealth to every ambitious ruler from Morocco to Egypt. The very information he had used as diplomatic leverage now became a strategic vulnerability. Every neighboring kingdom began calculating whether the wealth they could gain by conquering Mali's gold mines outweighed the costs of military conflict. The Moroccan Sultanate, in particular, began developing long-term strategies to control the trans-Saharan gold trade. They couldn't directly attack Mali. The distance and logistical challenges made that impossible. But they could strangle the kingdom's trade routes and gradually assume control over the commercial networks that generated Mali's prosperity. Even more challenging were the internal pressures created by Musa's international success. His pilgrimage had cost an enormous amount. Estimates suggest he spent the equivalent of several billion modern dollars, and that wealth had come directly from Mali's treasury. Local governors who had contributed gold to fund the journey began questioning whether the diplomatic benefits justified the massive expenditure. Regional leaders within Mali started demanding greater autonomy, arguing that if the empire was wealthy enough to give away gold in foreign countries, it was wealthy enough to reduce taxation and grant more local control. The very success that had made Musa internationally famous was creating domestic political instability. The crisis deepened when Musa made a decision that revealed the moral complexity of his character. Realizing that he had seriously destabilized gold markets across North Africa, he began attempting to buy back some of the gold he had distributed in Cairo, offering to pay interest rates to correct the economic disruption he had caused. This decision was unprecedented in medieval economics and demonstrated both admirable responsibility and troubling implications. On one hand, Musa was acknowledging the harm his actions had caused and attempting to repair the damage. On the other hand, his ability to manipulate entire regional economies revealed a level of individual power that challenged the basic structures of medieval society. The final test came when rival kingdoms began forming coalitions, specifically designed to counter Mali's influence. The Songhai Empire to the east, the Mossi kingdoms to the south, and various Moroccan dynasties to the north all began coordinating their policies to limit Mali's trade advantages and challenge its regional dominance. For the first time since becoming ruler, Musa faced organized, systematic opposition that couldn't be resolved through generous trade agreements or diplomatic gifts. His wealth was still massive, his armies still powerful, but the international attention his pilgrimage had generated had also created new enemies and new challenges that would define the rest of his reign. The man who had walked to Mecca as the richest individual in human history returned to Mali as a king struggling to manage the consequences of his own unprecedented success. His greatest triumph had created his greatest challenge. How do you govern an empire when the entire world knows exactly how wealthy you are, and half of them are plotting to take that wealth for themselves? Mansa Musa died around 1337, having ruled Mali for approximately 25 years through one of the most remarkable periods in African history. His death marked the end of an era, but the consequences of his legendary pilgrimage continued reverberating across continents for generations. The immediate aftermath of his reign revealed both the brilliance and the vulnerability of his approach to power. Mali remained the dominant West African empire for another century, controlling the gold trade routes and maintaining the diplomatic relationships Musa had established. The kingdom's capital cities, Timbuktu, Gao, and Jenne, became internationally renowned centers of learning and commerce, attracting scholars, merchants, and diplomats from across the Islamic world. But Musa's successors faced challenges that his wealth alone couldn't solve. The international attention he had generated made Mali a permanent target for conquest and economic manipulation. Moroccan forces eventually captured Timbuktu in 1591, effectively ending Mali's dominance over the trans-Saharan trade routes. The very fame that Musa had created to protect his kingdom ultimately contributed to its downfall. The economic disruption he caused in Cairo became a cautionary tale studied by medieval economists and Islamic scholars. His ability to single-handedly destabilize regional currencies demonstrated both the power of extreme wealth and the responsibility that comes with it. Modern economists studying inflation and monetary policy still reference Musa's gold distribution as an early example of how individual actions can have systemic consequences. Yet his legacy extends far beyond economics or even African history. Mansa Musa proved that medieval Africa was home to civilizations as sophisticated and wealthy as anything in Europe or Asia. His pilgrimage forced the Islamic world to recognize African kingdoms as equal partners rather than peripheral territories. European cartographers, initially ignorant of African geography, began accurately mapping West African empires and trade routes. More profoundly, Musa's story challenges fundamental assumptions about wealth, power, and responsibility. He possessed more individual wealth than perhaps anyone in human history, yet used it primarily for religious devotion and diplomatic relationship building rather than military conquest or personal luxury. His approach to leadership, creating prosperity for others as a path to lasting security, remains relevant in modern discussions of international development and economic inequality. The moral complexity of his legacy resists simple judgment. Was he a visionary leader who used unprecedented wealth to build international relationships and promote his faith? Or was he a reckless ruler whose extravagant display destabilized entire regions and ultimately endangered his own people? The answer depends partly on perspective and partly on values that transcend historical analysis. What remains undeniable is the scale of his achievement. In an age when most rulers barely controlled territories beyond their capital cities, Musa governed an empire spanning multiple modern nations. In an era when international travel required months of dangerous journey, he successfully conducted diplomacy across 3 continents. In a time when wealth was typically measured in land or armies, he accumulated liquid assets that allowed him to reshape regional economies. His story also illuminates the interconnectedness of the medieval world in ways that challenge common assumptions about historical isolation. Gold mined in West Africa funded European trade, influenced Middle Eastern politics, and supported Islamic scholarship from Spain to India. African kingdoms weren't peripheral to medieval global systems. They were essential components of international networks that connected diverse civilizations. Perhaps most remarkably, Mansa Musa accomplished all of this while maintaining genuine religious devotion and cultural authenticity. His pilgrimage wasn't mere political theater. Contemporary accounts consistently describe him as a sincere Muslim whose faith motivated his actions. He managed to be simultaneously a shrewd political strategist and a devout believer, a careful economist and a generous philanthropist. For modern audiences, Musa's story raises compelling questions about the relationship between individual success and social responsibility. If you possessed unlimited wealth, would you use it primarily for personal benefit, national advantage, or global good? How do you balance religious obligation with political necessity? What do we owe to future generations when our actions have consequences we can't fully predict? His pilgrimage remains the wealthiest journey in human history. But more than that, it represents a unique moment when one person's individual faith journey became a transformative international event. In our interconnected modern world, where individual decisions can have global consequences, Mansa Musa's story offers both inspiration and warning about the power and responsibility that come with extraordinary success. The golden caravan that left Mali in 1324 changed the world in ways that continue echoing 7 centuries later. It reminds us that Africa has always been integral to global civilization, that wealth without wisdom can be dangerous, and that the most lasting legacy any leader can create isn't monuments or conquests, but the relationships and institutions that outlive their creators. What do you think? Could any modern leader undertake a journey that would have comparable global impact? And if you possessed Mansa Musa's wealth, would you have the courage and the wisdom to use it as he did? Let us know in the comments below. And if this incredible story of history's wealthiest journey amazed you, subscribe for more untold stories from Africa's remarkable past.